I still remember the first time the water rose into my yard. It wasn't a biblical flood, not the kind you see on the news, just a slow, creeping surge from the creek that snaked behind our neighborhood. The rain had been steady for days, and by evening the ground was already saturated. I watched from my porch as the water swallowed my garden, then licked at the bottom of my back fence. My stomach tightened. I had moved here for peace, not to fight water battles in my retirement. By midnight, I was ankle-deep in my basement, hauling boxes of old family photos onto shelves and muttering curses under my breath. When dawn came, the scene looked like something out of a bad dream: soggy carpets, ruined furniture, and the smell of damp wood. The worst part, I knew this wasn't an act of God, it was negligence. The HOA had been warned about the clogged storm drains for years. Neighbors had begged them to clear the overgrowth along the creek banks, but every request was met with the same smug response from their board president, a woman everyone secretly called Karen, with a clipboard. Maintenance of natural waterways is not the HOA's responsibility, she'd snapped at me once, her lips pursed so tight they looked like a paper cut. That line echoed in my head as I stared at the muddy water creeping higher in my basement. Natural waterways, sure, but when the drains and culverts the HOA was supposed to maintain were clogged with years of leaves, branches, and trash, what else could happen? This wasn't nature's fault. This was human laziness, wrapped in bureaucracy. I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I filed a formal complaint. I attached photos of my basement, close-ups of the broken drainage grates, even a video showing how water pooled in the street during every heavy rain. I hand-delivered the packet to the HOA office, certain they'd have to take it seriously now. A week later, their response arrived. A one-page letter with the HOA's logo at the top. After careful review, the board has determined that the flooding is due to acts of nature beyond our scope of responsibility. As such, no action will be taken at this time. Additionally, homeowners are reminded that basement waterproofing is a private responsibility. I felt heat rise in my face. They had dismissed me like a pesky fly. Worse, they had the audacity to imply this was my fault. I called the HOA office and asked for Karen. She answered in her clipped, nasal tone. "Karen, this is unacceptable," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That creek hasn't been cleared in years. The storm drains are clogged. You know it, and I've got the photos to prove it." Her reply made my blood boil. "Mr. Harris, we all have to live with the realities of our environment. If you can't manage water on your property, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you." The arrogance, the dismissiveness. I had to set the phone down before I said something that would have gotten me fined. Now let me pause and ask you, the viewers, has anyone ever had an HOA dismiss you like this? If you're angry right now, go ahead and type HOA Karen in the comments, because trust me, you're going to want to stick around to hear how this played out. The flooding didn't stop with me. A month later, during another storm, water surged into 3 more basements on our street. I stood with my neighbor Linda, knee-deep in her driveway, as she cried over her ruined washer and dryer. "They won't listen to us," she said, tears mixing with the rain. "It's like we don't even matter." That was when something shifted in me. This wasn't just about my basement anymore. This was about an HOA board that thought they were untouchable. They thought their clipboards and bylaws made them invincible. They were wrong. I started digging, and what I found was the first crack in their armor. While flipping through county records late one night, I discovered that our HOA's charter specifically required them to maintain common area drainage systems and water management structures. My heart pounded. The very thing they claimed wasn't their responsibility was written in black and white as their legal duty. That was the moment I knew. This fight was bigger than me. And I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure the entire neighborhood saw them held accountable. But here's where it gets interesting, because once I brought this evidence forward, the HOA didn't back down. They doubled down, and that arrogance, it would become their downfall. This was only the beginning. Do you think HOAs should be responsible for flood prevention in common areas? Yes or no? The discovery of that clause in the HOA's charter lit a fire under me. For the first time since the floods began, I felt like I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just some cranky retiree complaining about the weather. I was a homeowner, with rights backed by the HOA's own documents. I made copies and slid them into a binder I'd started calling my flood file. Every piece of evidence, every letter, every soggy photo went in there. I was building a case, brick by brick, paper by paper, but when I brought it up at the next HOA meeting, the reaction floored me. The board sat behind a long folding table in the community clubhouse. Karen, of course, sat dead center with her clipboard, her silver reading glasses perched at the edge of her nose. To her right was Jim, the vice president, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. And to her left, a younger woman named Tiffany, who had mastered the art of nodding at whatever Karen said. When my turn to speak came, I stood, binder in hand, heart thumping. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to Article 4, Section 3 of the HOA Charter, I began. My voice trembled slightly, but I steadied it. It clearly states the association is responsible for maintaining drainage systems and water management structures. The flooding we've all endured falls under that responsibility. I laid the copied clause on the table in front of them. For a moment, there was silence. Then Karen laughed. "Oh, Mr. Harris," she said, with that smug smile that made my fists clench. "You've misinterpreted it. That section refers to decorative water features, like the fountains by the entrance, not the creek, not storm drains. Those are outside our scope." My jaw dropped. Decorative water features. Karen, with all due respect, that's nonsense. Storm drains and culverts are clearly part of water management. Everyone here knows it. A murmur rose from the neighbors behind me. Linda chimed in. "My basement's been ruined twice this year. Don't tell me that's just decoration." Karen slammed her gavel against the table. "Order. Homeowners are reminded to direct all comments to the board." That was the first time I saw it, her fear flickering for just a second. She wasn't used to being challenged with facts, and she definitely wasn't expecting the room to turn against her. But here's where the board pulled their first dirty trick. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, a violation notice. Apparently, my trash cans had been left out too long after pickup day. Fine, $25. The week after that, another letter. My lawn edging was a non-compliant. Fine, $50. I laughed bitterly when I read it, though it stung. This wasn't about trash cans or lawns. This was retaliation. They wanted to scare me off, to make me regret standing up at that meeting. Viewers, tell me in the comments, have you ever had an HOA weaponize petty rules against you? Because I swear this was the clearest example of abuse of power I'd ever seen. But here's the twist they didn't see coming. Instead of folding, I started talking to neighbors. I knocked on doors, shared copies of the charter, and showed them my flood file. To my surprise, people rallied. Linda signed on right away. So did Mark, the veteran down the street whose basement had flooded twice. Even quiet Mr. Alvarez, who rarely said more than hello, handed me a stack of photos he'd been saving for years. One night over coffee at my kitchen table, Linda leaned in and said, "You know, I've got a cousin who works in state environmental regulation. They might want to hear about this." That single line was the pattern interrupt that changed everything. I hadn't thought beyond the HOA's walls, but she was right. If the HOA was failing to maintain drainage systems, it wasn't just a private issue. It could be a violation of state water management laws. I felt my pulse quicken. For weeks I'd been playing defense. Maybe it was time to go on offense. The next morning I made the call. I didn't know what to expect. Bureaucracy moves slow, right? But when I explained the flooding, the ignored maintenance, and the clause, in the charter, the official on the other end of the line grew quiet. "Sir," he said carefully, "what you're describing may be a violation of multiple state codes. We'll need documentation." Documentation. I almost laughed. I had a binder 3 inches thick. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, hope. But of course the HOA wasn't done with me. They were about to make one last move that would blow this battle wide open. Stay tuned, because this is where things start getting ugly. What do you think the HOA did next to try to shut me down? If I thought the violation notices were petty, the next move from the HOA made it crystal clear they weren't just playing defense anymore. They wanted war. It started with another envelope in my mailbox. This one looked official, heavier than the usual threats. Inside was a notice demanding that I cease the spread of misinformation harmful to the community. According to the letter, my conversations with neighbors and my unauthorized distribution of documents were considered harassment of the HOA board, and if I didn't stop, they would pursue legal action against me. I sat at my kitchen table, letter in hand, my coffee going cold. Legal action for sharing their own charter with neighbors. The audacity was staggering. I showed the letter to Linda and Mark that evening. Linda slapped the table. "They can't do that. That's intimidation." Mark, ever the calm veteran, leaned back in his chair and said, "That's what scared people do. They're bluffing. But if they want a fight, we'll give them one." That was when I realized I wasn't standing alone anymore. The neighbors were fed up, and together we had something the HOA couldn't stop. Truth, backed by evidence. Still, I wanted to be smart. I called a local attorney, just for a consult. His words gave me a strange mix of fear and excitement. "They can threaten all they want," he said, flipping through copies of the violation letters and the so-called harassment notice. "But if this goes to court, they're opening a door they don't want opened. A judge will demand records, financial, maintenance contracts. If they're hiding negligence, it'll all come out." I left his office with a new mindset. I wasn't just a homeowner fighting for a dry basement anymore. I was part of something bigger, a pushback against bullies in suits who thought their power was absolute. But here's where the story takes another twist. 2 weeks later, a white state vehicle rolled into our neighborhood. The logo on the door read, "Department of Environmental Quality." Out stepped a tall man in a windbreaker, clipboard in hand, scanning the drainage ditch like it was a crime scene. Neighbors peeked from windows. Karen herself stormed out of her. house, heels clicking against the sidewalk, her lips pursed so tight I thought they might disappear. "Can I help you?" she demanded. The inspector didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we're here to assess potential violations of state water management codes. We've received multiple complaints." Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered. "This is private property. You'll need permission from the HOA to—" The inspector cut her off with the kind of calm authority that made my chest swell. "State law gives us access to investigate common drainage systems. You'll want to cooperate." I stood across the street, watching the exchange with quiet satisfaction. This was the hidden power reveal moment I'd been waiting for. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. And when the inspector started snapping photos of clogged drains, overgrown culverts, and mud-stained basements, I knew we'd hit a turning point. But instead of backing down, the HOA doubled down. They called an emergency meeting the next evening. The clubhouse was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension. Karen banged her gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "This witch hunt has to stop," she declared. "Certain individuals in this community," her eyes locked on me, "are undermining the harmony we've worked so hard to maintain." From the back, Linda shouted, "Harmony? Tell that to my ruined appliances." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For once, the board wasn't getting polite nods. They were facing real anger. Karen tried to regain control. "The flooding is an act of nature, nothing more. We will not be scapegoated by people who refuse to take responsibility for their own properties." That's when I stood, binder in hand, my voice steady and clear. "Then explain why your own charter says drainage maintenance is your responsibility. Explain why the state inspector found violations just this morning. Explain why families on this very street are paying thousands in damages while you hand out fines for trash cans." The room erupted. Neighbors clapped, shouted, even stood with me. It was the community rally moment I'd dreamed of. Karen's face flushed crimson. She banged her gavel again, but this time no one listened. And here's where I'll pause for you, the viewers, because I want to know, if you were sitting in that meeting, would you have spoken up or stayed quiet? Drop your answer in the comments, because this was the night everything cracked wide open. The HOA thought they could silence us, but their arrogance had triggered something they never saw coming. The state wasn't just investigating, they were building a case. And that case was about to drown the HOA in fines. Do you think the HOA will try to hide their financial records, or will they come clean under pressure? The storm clouds outside seemed to echo the storm brewing in our neighborhood. Every day, the state inspector's car appeared like clockwork. Clipboards, cameras, water gauges. It was like watching detectives gather evidence at a crime scene. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. A crime of negligence. I noticed something fascinating. At first, neighbors just peeked from behind curtains, whispering. But as days passed, they started approaching the inspector, pointing out issues, handing over photos, even sharing repair bills. It wasn't just me anymore. It was the entire community testifying. Karen, on the other hand, grew more frantic. She walked the neighborhood in her heels and visor, clipboard clutched tight like a shield. But instead of her usual smugness, she looked hunted. One afternoon, I overheard her arguing with Tiffany outside the clubhouse. "This is out of control," Karen hissed. "Do you understand what happens if they fine us?" "We don't have the reserves for that." Tiffany's voice trembled. "Maybe we should have just cleaned the drains." Karen's reply was sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't you dare say that again." That was the pattern interrupt. weren't invincible. They were desperate, and then came the first public humiliation. The state posted an official notice on the clubhouse door, HOA under investigation for drainage violations. It was stamped with the state seal, visible to everyone who walked past. Parents pointed it out to their kids on the way to the pool. Neighbors snapped photos and shared them in the community Facebook group. For years, the HOA had lorded their rules over us. Now the tables had turned, but of course, Karen couldn't let it go quietly. She called another emergency meeting. This one was standing room only. The air inside was hot and charged, like a courtroom before a verdict. Karen opened with her usual sharp gavel slam. "Homeowners, I urge you not to be swayed by outside forces. The state's probe is political theatre, nothing more." That was when Mark, calm as ever, stood up. "Political theatre. My basement looks like a swimming pool every time it rains. You've ignored it for years, and now you're being called out." The crowd erupted in nods and murmurs. Karen tried again. "These fines will bankrupt us all. Is that what you want?" I couldn't stay silent. "No, Karen. What we want is accountability. What we want is the board to do its job. You could have fixed the drains for a fraction of what this will cost. Instead, you covered it up. And now the whole community will pay for your arrogance." The inspector himself walked in midway through, which only fueled the tension. He stood at the back, quietly listening, his mere presence a reminder that this wasn't a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was official, and here's the audience retention moment. The inspector took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, our preliminary findings indicate multiple violations of state water management law. We will be issuing fines in the coming weeks. The HOA has been given opportunities to correct these issues and has failed to act." Gasps rippled through the room. Tiffany's face drained of color. Jim, the VP, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Karen's knuckles turned white around her gavel. Neighbors began shouting questions. "How much? When? Who's responsible?" The inspector's answer was firm. "The fines will be levied against the HOA as an organization. How that cost is distributed is for the board to determine. But let me be clear, penalties of this scale often lead to state oversight." Oversight, that single word was the death knell. The very idea that an outside authority could come in and strip Karen's board of control was delicious irony. Viewers, I've got to ask you, would you feel a little satisfaction seeing an HOA board lose their grip like this? Be honest in the comments, because I sure did. The meeting ended in chaos. Some neighbors shouted at the board, others demanded resignations. A few even walked out chanting, "Clean the drains! Clean the drains!" That night my phone lit up with messages. Screenshots of the posted notice spread online. Friends from other neighborhoods texted, "Is this your HOA?" The story was out. We weren't just gossip in cul-de-sacs anymore. We were an example of HOA failure spreading across the county. But the best moment came a week later when an envelope arrived. Not from the HOA, but from the state. Inside was a formal notice of fines, 6 figures worth, to be paid within 90 days. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter, the weight of vindication sinking in. For the first time, the HOA wasn't fining us. The state was fining them, and the cracks in their empire were about to split wide open. Send this story to someone you know who's ever been bullied by an HOA. They'll get it. If you were on that HOA board, would you resign before the fines hit, or try to fight it out? The fines hit like a tidal wave. $125,000. That was the figure printed in bold on the state's final notice, due within 90 days. When word spread, the neighborhood buzzed with equal parts shock and relief. For years, Karen and her board had wielded power with smug indifference, handing out petty fines and dismissing real problems. Now, for once, they were the ones scrambling. I'll never forget the emergency board meeting that followed. The clubhouse, usually their fortress, felt more like a sinking ship. Karen sat at the table with papers scattered in front of her, makeup streaked from the heat, hair frazzled. Tiffany looked ready to bolt. Jim, the VP, actually muttered, "We're doomed," under his breath, loud enough for half the room to hear. Karen pounded her gavel, though her voice shook. "These fines are unfair. We will challenge them." The inspector, who had been invited to observe, calmly responded, "You are free to appeal, but every day you delay increases the penalties. Your best option is compliance." That was the nail in the coffin. Compliance meant draining the reserves, raising dues, and worst of all, admitting they had been wrong all along. And here's the irony. The very people they had ignored, the homeowners with ruined basements and wrecked furniture, were now the ones demanding accountability. Linda stood up, voice steady. "If our dues go up, it's because you ignored us. Not because of nature, because of you." Applause rippled across the room. Neighbors who had once whispered their complaints now spoke freely. Years of pent-up frustration poured out. One man even shouted, "Resign already." Karen's face flushed crimson, but this time no gavel could silence the crowd. That week, 2 board members, Jim and Tiffany, quietly resigned. They wanted no part of the sinking ship. Karen tried to hold on, but the pressure mounted. Letters demanding her removal circulated, petitions appeared on doorsteps, and then came the ultimate humiliation, a recall vote. I'll never forget the sight of Karen storming out of the clubhouse, box of personal files in her arms, head down as neighbors cheered. The woman who once fined me for leaving my trash cans out had been tossed out herself. The state didn't stop there. Oversight was imposed for 2 full years. Every financial decision, every maintenance delay, every budget adjustment had to be signed off by regulators. The HOA's reign of unchecked power was gone. And here's where the underdog victory moment crystallized. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt peace. Not because the creek magically stopped flooding. Storms still came, and water still rose, but because now the drains were cleared, the culverts maintained, and repairs handled before disaster struck. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone. Seniors like Linda didn't have to fear ruined appliances. Families like the Alvarezes didn't have to worry about kids playing in moldy basements. Even Mark, the veteran, admitted with a grin, "Feels like we finally won, huh?" Yes, we had. And to the viewers, here's the truth. Beating an HOA isn't always about lawsuits or shouting matches. Sometimes it's about persistence, evidence, and patience. They ignored me, mocked me, fined me, but when the state probe flooded them with fines, justice came crashing down harder than any storm. So let me leave you with this. If you're fighting your own HOA battles, don't give up. Document everything, rally your neighbors, find the hidden power in your state codes and charters, because bullies in suits only win if we let them. Now I'll ask you, have you ever stood up to an HOA and won? Drop your story in the comments, and if you think HOA boards everywhere need to hear this warning, share this video with them. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting back, it's watching the law do the talking for you. And the look On Karen's face when she realized the board was finished. Priceless. If this ending made you smile, hit the like button and type "Justice Served" in the comments. Should state governments oversee HOAs more strictly, or should neighborhoods handle it themselves? Share this with someone who's ever dealt with HOA bullies. They'll get it.